Okay, hello everybody, and welcome to the Bay Area Book Festival. I am your host here, your moderator for the panel Celebrating Cannabis. So welcome all you stoners. My name is Dan Karkoska. I write a cannabis column for 48 Hills over the last 6 years, and I also produce and host the only queer cannabis drag party in existence called Puff. And currently, I'm also producing a show for Oasis June 2nd through 4th for the Cockettes, if you know who they are, through the history of San Francisco. So enough about me. Now we're here to talk about cannabis. And I have a wonderful panel here for Celebrating Cannabis. Let me welcome from the book Joy of Cannabis, Melanie Abrams and Larry Smith. And joining us via Zoom, we have the lovely Monica Lowe, who wrote Weed Gummies Cookbook. Thank you for joining us from so far. So anyway, I'm super excited to be here. We also want to thank our sponsor, East Wind Books. And after the show, after this, I believe there will be a signing for whatever books you want to have signed over in their pavilion. And you can also buy all these books also on bookshop.org. So be sure and take a moment out to buy one of these books. They've worked really hard to get it through. It's not easy getting a book out, so that takes that much diligence. And then plus we're all stoners, so let's celebrate and support the stoner community. So anyway, welcome you all. And so first off, why don't you just give me a little introduction about yourselves and what brought you into the world of cannabis?
Sure.
Go ahead.
I'm Larry. Thanks for coming, everyone. Is the mic on? Yeah? Okay, good. It's hard to tell. A guy named Eric Mattia on a farm road in high school brought me into the world of cannabis, in the 80s. But my journey with cannabis, and Melanie's, I'm sure Monica's, are very different. But I was like, you're basic. I liked it, college a little bit, had too many pot brownies and was like, crawling on the floor and wondering what color my hair was, because there was nobody knew what they were doing back then. But in terms of really diving into the world and writing this book with Melanie, for me, I do something, my day job is something called the 6-Word Memoir Project, where anyone can tell a story in 6-word memoirs. It's a whole other thing. But before that, I was a journalist for many years. And one of the things I did for places like Salon.com, frankly, back in its glory years, and Teen People and Men's Journal, was I would write about drugs and how they affect people. For Teen People was actually a series on This Is Your Brain on MDMA. This is your brain on what was called marijuana. Now we appropriately call cannabis. We can talk about that later. This is your brain on coke. And really the science and how that kind of thing. And when the pandemic happened, and I had recently met Melanie, and we just became friends and started talking, we'll hold off on why we wrote this book. But I was a journalist, and with this book, I've returned to my journalism roots, and it's been a real blast.
Hi, I'm Melanie. So yes, my journey with cannabis has been long as well, and started far too young in the back of a station wagon, smoking out of a homemade pipe Coke can with my older cousin. But really, this was definitely indulged, but it wasn't until it became medically legal in California that I really kind of fell in love again, and then saw all of the benefits for so many different things, from eating to parenting to all kinds of wonderful ways that cannabis can help you. And I, in my other life, like Larry, I have another life. I teach. I'm an instructor at Cal, and I write very serious literary novels. So this is like a lovely and fun departure for me into something playful, but also super important to me. So that's kind of me.
Okay, Monica.
Hey, I'm Monica. I'm the creator of Weed, which is this educational culinary cannabis platform, and also the author of the Weed Gummies Cookbook that's coming out in August. I started smoking cannabis when I was in art school, and I used it a lot in social settings, but also as an inspiration to really get the creative juices going. But my whole journey into the cannabis industry was really by accident. Goes back in 2015. I signed up for one of those early morning boot camp classes where it's just like go, 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 high intensity, balls to the walls. And I just herniated a disc within the very first week, which is horrible. And my doctor had me on opioids and 9 ibuprofen a day, completely wrecked my stomach, making me feel even worse. And my roommate at the time just took pity on me, and she gave me an edible, and that night I slept so well. So that really just set things in motion for me. I really wanted to figure out how to make infusions at home so I could help, manage the pain. And then all the recipes I found online were, use a crock pot or use a stovetop, and that was just a no-go for me because the apartment I lived in was a strict no smoking building. So we couldn't have the smell of cannabis wafting around. But I was a creative director of a sous vide startup, and I was like, why don't I just sous vide my weed? And it worked. So throwing everything into a bag, putting it underwater to infuse, and there was just no smell. And just documented all my experiments and recipes on my blog and my Instagram, and just opened up a bunch of doors for me. So that's kind of my journey into the industry in a nutshell.
And so your blog name is Sous Vide or Sous Weed, right? And that is a play on the word sous vide, which you also use in your cookbook on ways to get the cannabis into your materials, correct? Can you tell me a little bit more what sous vide really is to explain it to everybody?
Sous vide is it's just that it means under vacuum, and you can put your food in a bag or in a mason jar, put it underwater, and cook it and infuse it at a very regulated temperature. So you don't really need to have this fancy device when you're making your cannabis infusions. You can do it on a stovetop or a crock pot, and there's a bunch of different ways to do it, but this one's the one that worked for me. But yeah, just really regulated temperature, circulating in a water bath, and everything's just sealed up nicely. The cannabis, the cooking oil in a bag in a mason jar underwater.
And that way also gets rid of the smell, the part of the whole situation.
Yeah, and you get to preserve a lot of the wonderful terpenes in the flower. Nothing's really burning off, and the temperature is so regulated that you're not going to have to be babysitting a stovetop, for example, or just washing over a crock pot and making sure nothing burns down the house. You can just set it and forget it.
Yeah, I know when I first got here, I had a friend who would make his own ghee in the kitchen, and you would go in and sit with him, and after 15 minutes, you had to go take a nap because of all those fumes coming up. And he would just be sitting there. It was completely normal to him, but that's a definite way. And I understand when you first started, you didn't want to you had a smell factor for your apartment. You couldn't have that smell. So it's an interesting way of doing it. I saw in your book you have it where you can actually use just Ziploc bags too, and just roll the air out of them and put them in there and do that.
Yeah, they have silicone bags now too that are a lot more eco-friendly, and mason jars too. It's liquid,
right.
So
ubiquitous mason jar.
Mason jars are great.
Or you can do anything with a mason jar.
Yeah.
Okay, so anyway, let's go over back to Joy of Cannabis. I really enjoyed reading your book. Like I said, I went through it 2 or 3 times, and each time something else caught my brain. Whether the beginning, I really enjoyed all the activities. And you have games in there. You have recipes. You have ways to make weed lube, which is and so I can only imagine that there must have been lots of weed smoked and lots of laughter going on when you guys were coming up with all these ideas you have for your book.
Definitely, there was for sure. We should probably put together all 75 activities with sub-activities and check off all of the ones that we've actually done, which is quite a few. But there's a few that we haven't, fully indulged in.
Okay, so what are actually some of your favorite activities from the book?
I think there, the favorite versus playful, having fun versus surprising. So I think for me, the ones that I found the most, that I love the most, are kind of the ones that are most surprising. Like, for example, I think the first activity in the book is called Runner's High. Exercise and cannabis go hand in hand.
Who knew?
Well, and it's fascinating because we could just see the effects and be like, wow, you're happier when you're running if you're high. But it actually, what happens with the runner's high, with the brain, is that it activates, whether you're smoking weed or not, if you're running and exercising, it's activating the endocannabinoid system in your body, producing a high that is very similar to cannabis. So when you add cannabis into that, you have, double the effects. And also there's all kinds of science that kind of has also reinforced this idea that when you smoke weed or whatever, however you choose to consume it, it is you're actually more motivated to exercise.
And who would have thought that with all that we were growing up thinking if you got stoned, you never left your couch and just sat there and ate Cheeto, which you could do.
We have activities
and I
for
had
that
done
as
it,
well.
but you could do other things as well. I think it also depends on what flavor you want.
Because you know what, no judgment.
Yeah.
Exactly. And now we're also learning about what the entourage effect, where we're learning that all these other things play a factor besides just your THC percentage.
Right.
So when you see your weed in the dispensary, it might be 23%, but it might hit your body differently depending on what terpenes it has, all these other things.
Right. Yeah.
And that's what that is. And going back to what Monica was saying about keeping everything sealed up while cooking, that in turn would make the weed more powerful, because when you smell that stuff coming out, that's actually you're losing terpenes.
Yeah.
So anyway, okay, well, and lots of interesting facts too as well. So does anybody here know why we call weed 420? You guys want to share that story?
Well, we're glad you asked. We have a section in the front called "Glad You Asked," and I'll talk a little bit about the origins of why this book. So before I answer that, so this book I think came out of frustration with, even in the Bay Area, how little people knew about it. And I mean, not all people, but like, really, Larry, you love cleaning? Hi, I'm like, not only do I do that, but that's one of the most often things people. Oh, you wrote this book. I love to get high cleaning, and I'm like, evidently lots of us do. I really didn't know. I know I kind of did it because you focus, right? But the friends who I've been doing drugs with for years, recreationally and safely, of course, under the parent supervision, are like, productivity, creativity. I'm like, seriously, Penelope, like, we should have been along by this time. But my sister, my little sister, she's just turned 50. My little sister lives in the Bay Area. She has a very important job for the city of San Francisco. I really hope I get to say this on KQED. And I said, Susie, after years of playing around with THC and CBD and really wasting a lot of money, not a waste because it was trial and error, but now when I've researched this book with Melanie, I figured out the right, not just strain, but brand for sleep. And as it turns out, we have a lot of the same DNA, my sister and I. We have the exact same sleep problems. So I was like, this one, for what it's worth, Papa and Barclay's tincture relief, RELEAF, like relief, like that. They're pretty good with, and we don't endorse brands in the book because like that's a whole mess we didn't want to get involved with. But that one has worked for me. And I said, look, she's like, well, bring me some. And I'm like, well, I live in the East Bay, and I don't really think I'm going to be in the city for 10 or 12 days. According to Yelp, there are 3 dispensaries within a half a mile of your place. Oh, and this one gets 25% off for the first time use. I'm like, she's like, I don't know how to do that. I'm like, right. A dispensary in 2022, and this was now probably 2020, we had this conversation, is like a video store in the 80s. Quentin Tarantino greets you and makes you feel like a jerk because you don't know what you're doing. And that's not for all dispensaries. So go ahead.
No, I was going to agree with you.
And so I held my little sister's hand, as we used to do as children, and I walked her into the dispensary. And I'm like, hi, I'm Larry. I'm fairly well versed in this, but not totally. You're always learning. This is what we're looking for. I think you have Papa, and they did. And then, and she's like, oh, tinctures, that tastes yucky. I'm like, you'll get used to it. You know what I mean? And there's other ways to do it. There's patches and things. So, if my sister, who's number one, my sister, number two, like just living here, is afraid to walk in a dispensary. So in that, glad you asked, I'm about to answer your question, actually. I circled all the way back. We actually, how do I navigate a dispensary? And we talked to dispensary owners, Steve D'Angelo, the father of legal cannabis, a Lion, a Mimi Lamb in a really cool chain of dispensaries in Canada, Super Ed. And they're like, here's how you do it. And you know what Steve said? Go to one of my places first, because we give you all the time in the world, and don't come at 5 p.m. on Friday. 2 p.m. is a good time on a Tuesday, right? Because then our bud tenders, that's what they're called, as you know, will help you. And by the way, once you figure it out, go to a cheaper place where you get no customer service. I mean, Steve said this. 420 is a classically like there's lots of legends. Is it a Bob Marley something? Is it the time of something? And so we'd heard all the legends, and we too looked down the rabbit hole of that. And the answer is there were some high school kids in San Rafael, just up the road, right, who heard one of their one of the buddies, like brother or uncle or somebody, had heard there's a hidden treasure of weed somewhere around there, like buried treasure. Am I remembering this right?
You are.
Good. And so they would
Well, no,
meet.
it's yes.
They would meet at this tree every day at 420. Did they find the weed?
They did not.
But 420 is in the Oxford English Dictionary, and that's a bigger victory than finding the weed. Yeah.
Yeah, I understand. One of those people that was in that high school worked for the dead, and then that's how it got into the lexicon,
That's
because
right.
you know how things will pick up and use word
Yeah.
usage and everything.
Like somebody's like brother, work for the dead. Yeah, that's it. And you do. They were early influencers. The Grateful Dead.
On many levels,
You know,
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so 420. Okay, and so now let's talk. Both of you in your books both talk about cooking with weed, and so I know that my first experience was my friends would just chop it up and put it into brownies and bake it, and then you would sit there and eat it with it stinking in your teeth, and it'd be all gross, and you would get maybe high a little bit, but nothing like now. So, what is it you need to do to weed? Monica, maybe you can answer this for us, to make it palatable for us to eat and it having a good effect on us.
Basics of cannabis cooking really shouldn't be that intimidating, and it's not that intimidating. You don't need a special tool like I mentioned before,
Right.
like to device. And in my book, I do have recipes for a basic stovetop method. And then there's also a cannabis sugar that really doesn't require any cooking at all. So you can infuse it into an alcohol tincture, and then add that alcohol to sugar, let it dry, and then you have your infused sugar. So you can use that in pretty much everything. If you're using flour, I think flour tastes amazing. Every strain has a different terpene profile, and you can, your nose knows. If you smell something that smells really good, it's got really lovely, like citrusy, limonene aromas, use that and figure out what that works best in, like a salad dressing, whatever. And if you don't really love the flavor of cannabis, or that herbaceous floral notes or the green notes, then you can cook with distillate, which has all that stripped out. But for me, I love the taste of cannabis. I love those flavor profiles, and figuring out what strain works with what sort of oils, and how to pair that in savory or sweet dishes. The applications are endless, essentially.
And I think just coming back to your idea of putting in a bunch of brownies and then eating it, and it was not very good effects. I mean, the thing that I learned was that eating weed, you are not eating a compound that is psychoactive. You need heat in order to turn it psychoactive. So
and just cooking it in the oven doesn't do it.
It's not going to do it. So yeah, first, I mean, and Monica's talking about infusing it, which is a whole lane I don't know about at all with the alcohol and stuff. But with cooking, at least, you have to activate the THC before you even bake it into whatever.
Right. And what's that process called?
Decarboxylation.
Decarboxylation. I'd look that one up. I'm glad you said it before I did. So basically, that just means you need to chop up your weed and put it in the oven at 200 degrees for 20 minutes or something, until it turns brown and nutty smelling.
Yeah.
And then you're ready to go. Chop it up, put it in brownies, filter it, do whatever. But you're right, Monica. That was interesting that in your book you can actually make what is it you mix with alcohol?
Like a tincture and alcohol.
Tincture, that's the word I'm looking for. Yeah, so it's just basically Everclear or grain alcohol and weed.
Exactly.
And you put it in a bag in a dark space and just shake it up every once in a while.
Exactly.
Right, and then from that you can just take that distillate and mix it with sugar, right? And then it dries out and you have your sugar. So it's just that simple.
Exactly, and there's just a ton of recipes that you can use that in afterwards.
I was also impressed with the keef honey recipe, because again, that's another easy one too, because that was just keef and honey and what you heated a little bit for a while, and that's it. You don't have to strain it or anything.
Exactly, you can just eat that, and your grinder did all the work for you.
Right. Well, when I read your book, when I've had that list of all the pieces and parts you need to do all that stuff, it was a little intimidating at first, but it seemed like you could manage to do with whatever you have. It would be great to have all those pieces, but basically the main thing you need is a candy thermometer. That seemed to be your best friend.
Yeah.
Every
it's
recipe.
Really gonna be your best friend.
I can tell about that.
Sugar work is, it's so finicky, and sugar work is science, right? You just have to keep a really close eye on that thermometer and the temperature. I ruined a couple batches here and there just because my kitchen was too humid, or I took my eye off the thermometer for like a second too long. But that's not to say that the recipes in this book are challenging at all.
No,
I just recommend testing it out first without cannabis, just to see how your workflow is in your kitchen. Because losing a batch with that cannabis infusion is just like so heartbreaking.
Yeah, it also seems like so much of the work is in the prep work in your book. It's like so much you have to infuse this, infuse that. But then once it came to the recipes, it was all pretty quick. You do whatever, put it in a mold and let it sit, or do whatever.
Totally, especially for gummies, those things are just like super fast, and you can eat it immediately, or you can cure it for a little bit longer for a little firmer of a texture, kind of more like what you get in the shelves in the stores or dispensaries.
Right, you said leave those overnight to sit, like with the regular air.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Where would somebody get molds?
You can order them on Amazon.
Well, of course, Amazon. Amazon always seems to have everything.
Yeah.
Okay, so now let's talk more. Let's see. Anybody have any specific thing you want to say or talk about from the book that you want to bring up?
Well, one thing I like about the book is, well, obviously we like the book, but that we know what we know and we know what we don't know. So we have 5 or 6 like guest essays in the book. And so, for example, I mean, she wrote about it, so I guess I can talk about it. Mollie Katzen, the Moosewood Cookbook. So she actually recently moved, but she was in Berkeley for years. And we have friends in common, and she heard about the book, and I did my fanboy, like, I made your recipes and got high in college. She's like, I hear that a lot, Larry. But spaghetti squash. And so I was like, oh, Mollie, we're doing this book. Do you want to write about cooking with cannabis? And she says, well, Larry, I don't cook with it really. I just love the process of gardening it. I just make enough for my friends. I give it away. I'm not selling it. I'm not Mollie Katzen, like, yeah, she's a drug dealer, right? And but she's so she said, just the tending of it's meditative. And she just wrote this lovely, like, honestly, all she did was reply to my email when I said, would you like to write about cooking? And she's like, well, actually, I do this. And I'm like, I'm going to edit this and put it in the book if that's okay, And then there's a great a rabbi named Amichai Lave, who's like the coolest rabbi you'll ever meet. Like Dan, he has a drag show, and so he's in New York, and he wrote a book called High for the Holidays, about how cannabis is a great way to connect and think more deeply during holidays, whether it's Thanksgiving or Yom Kippur, where you can smoke but you're not supposed to eat, right? So those are sort of lovely. We had a guy who's just an expert on anxiety talk about that and cannabis, and what else in there? OD.
And I was just going to say also, I think that was one of the pleasures of writing the book, is that we both are absolute lovers of the plant, but lots of things surprised us, and like some of it comes from the essays. Like we had somebody write about doing yoga high and the benefits, but I think for me a lot of the science was the most surprising and exciting. Just the endocannabinoid system in general. If you don't know, there's a system within your body that works so perfectly with cannabis that was actually named after cannabis.
Right, and it was in our body the whole time.
Yes, and
it's in there.
The only reason it was discovered, since we're on this topic of Jews and cannabis, by Jews in Hebrew University, was because they were trying to research how cannabis worked in the brain, and discovered that there is a system that exists, within our body that mimics how cannabis uses it, whether you have cannabis in your body or not. So the surprises were, I think, the thing that was most fun.
You combine the cannabis with the endocannabinoid system, which, by the way, the fact that these scientists got that name through all the rigmarole to name something, I just thought that was delightful.
It's a great word.
But when they work together, it's just better. It's more of the same thing your brain wants to do and is doing, but now you're just getting a nice little push in usually the right direction.
Yeah, brings your body back to equilibrium, right? There's also cannabinoids in breast milk, which is pretty fascinating.
That really is.
In all those movies where like someone's freaking out and they get high, it's like, I mean, it's a cartoon in a way, that movie scene, but like the truth is, like I've never had a panic attack that I'm gonna get high and I'll be better, but I'm like, something big is coming in some way, and like, let's just get ahead of this, Larry. You know what I mean? It might be a dinner party you're like not delighted to get to, or you're nervous about. Maybe not a job interview, but for some people for sure, it brings you down.
Yeah, and if it's not THC, it should be CBD, which is a thing that will actually like lower your stress levels even more. I even understand that, you know, when people were developing all the weed strains in the last decade or so, they were just trying to get all the CBD out because it kept from people getting higher, and they couldn't get those high percentages. And that if you do have anxiety when you do smoke weed, you should smoke weed with a little bit of CBD in there. That's going to help you a lot. And if you get too high, you know, air, water, eating something, and CBD.
Yeah.
If you take some CBD, it can bring you right back down.
Well, and that's something that's happening just recently that people should be aware of too, is that, you know, these THC strains that they're breeding for higher and higher THC.
Oh yeah, I looked like some 40-something% the other day.
Yeah, it's not necessarily a good thing. And one of the
No.
reasons why is because you're losing, they've bred out of a lot of things. So you're
Yes.
not getting that entourage effect. Which
You're
is
not getting the entourage effect.
Yeah, all
correct.
the other stuff that goes along within the plant isn't there when they're breeding these super high THC.
It seems that percentage thing is something that the dispensaries and people can play off onto to make something more sellable.
Yeah.
Oh no, dude, it comes in at 46%.
But I do think there is starting to be backlash against that.
Yeah,
as
because
well.
sometimes you got to smoke and go, yeah, or you smoke it and crawl into the corner with your cat, waiting for the world to end.
Right.
Let's see here. Monica, what was one of the first recipes that you actually made, and what was probably your favorite recipe in the book?
Ooh, well, definitely worked on a lot of the gummy recipes because the name of the cookbook is
Of course.
Cookbook. So that was one of the first ones I made. But my favorite one is actually nougat. So there are, it's not just weed gummies in the book.
No.
I go from gummies to soft caramels and nougats to hard candies and brittles. So it goes from easy to more challenging. But my favorite one is the Taiwanese nougat recipe. I chose to also, a lot of the recipes I chose were influenced by my Asian American background. And also, I grew up in Texas, so like Texan upbringing. So there are just like a bunch of different recipes in there that are just like inspired by that. So classic recipes like gummies, caramels, and lollipops, but also like boba and lychee jellies. But definitely Taiwanese nougat. I grew up eating that during the Lunar New Year, and I actually pulled my parents in to help me recipe test that. It was a really special experience getting them involved too, because they were initially really hesitant about me getting into cannabis to heal myself. So that was a fun one and a really special one for me. Yeah, lots of tinkering in the kitchen and harassing my chef friends too for pro tips when I like hit a snag in the road.
Dan, I want to play off your parents' thing because I think it's so interesting, and also something that we learned in the process of the book, which is that, you know, some people, when we said we're in this book, they were like, can I read it like now? Because I need to talk to my parents about it for different reasons. And I was like, well, it's not done. But I hear you. And there was this, well, we have a really lovely piece by Alia Voles about called Stoning the Elders, about when you get high with maybe a grandparent or a parent or whoever, you just focus on that curiosity and connection of maybe, and again, it doesn't have to be something you're related to, what a lovely experience that is. And she's got her own book, Home Baked, about her family in the 70s cannabis business. But, you know, in my situation, like my folks probably got high like twice in the 70s, you know, and they're just, you know, they're not, you wouldn't think that, they're not surprised I wrote this book. They find it kind of like, you know, like entertaining. But now my mom was like, yeah, can you bring me some of that stuff for sleep? And my dad is going through chemo, and so nausea, right?
Yeah.
And when I was like, listen, Dad, like, I think you should try this for nausea, I really expected a battle. He's like, okay, You know what I mean? It was like, and it's like, hey, can you bring some home again? And that's just interesting. And seniors are one of the fastest growing, maybe the fastest growing user base. But that, and friends who are doctors are like, our older patients are asking about this all the time, and some legally are afraid to talk about it, not in California, but in states where it's not legal, and others just don't know, and like their learning curve is large, and it's coming fast, which is great, but the industry is 2,000 years old in a way, right? The flower, we can date back to about 2,000 years, but really the modern industry is like, what, a decade old, if that. I mean, and so the education is really important, and I think a lot of the book is about education, but in a very playful, accessible way. And the older Americans in that, and my personal situation, my folks, fascinating.
Oh yeah, my father had open heart surgery. He lived in lived in Texas, and they were giving him all the pain medication. And like Monica, once I gave him some of those patches, the transdermal patches, and he said that like his wife put it on his back, and the pain went away for 3 days. And they wasn't getting any that kind of feedback at all from any of those other drugs. So I was sending him stuff all the time. Yeah. Couldn't quite get him to do a joint or anything like that, but when it came to the pain relief part, he really dove into it.
Well, and you got to meet people where they are. I give my dad delicious edible cookies. You know what I mean? It's like, a dad, don't eat too many of these because they are good. That's the risk, right? Some of this stuff, like I'm sure Monica's stuff is like awesome, right? Like you're not eating Cracker Jacks. You really got to remember.
Well, you have to watch out about that sometimes too. I mean, there's always the legendary going to a party and eating out of the wrong thing, and you have to put the person in the room with a glass of water. They stare in this.
Well, the only decent Instagram post I've had in years is I had left the cannabis for my folks during our last visit, and I was like, these are for sleep, these are for nausea, like in every part of the like both sides of the bag. And I posted Instagram and I said, friends, when leaving cannabis for your parents, please label things very carefully.
Very much so. And both of you in your books have things to print out to put on your containers to warn people and realize how many milligrams, because because I mean, then again, that's the great thing about microdosing. You start low and then build up.
I mean, I know with cooking. Right, go ahead.
No, just that's we talked to lots of people for this book, and one of the main things we'd ask, what's your advice? I mean, a good 75% of them, the first thing they said, start low, go slow, because you can always add more drugs, but you can't take them away.
I have friends that can do 100 milligrams, they don't even blink. Yeah. And other people like me, I'm about a 20 milligram person.
That's still high. I mean, like, yeah. I mean, I have a pretty high tolerance. 20 is significant.
Well, over a whole meal. Yeah. And Monica, I just wanted to mention the recipes I plan to make of yours out of the cookbook. I definitely want to make the bubble tea.
Oh, yeah.
I thought that whole idea of making those little bubbles cannabis infused and having that with that would be really cool. And then the other one I'll be making will be the honeycomb brittle with almonds and sesame seeds. I'm a brittle person, so that just hit all my buttons. And also I loved your idea about doing the mimosa gummy and then putting a toothpick through it and then putting it and serving it over a real mimosa. I thought that was a really clever and a visually interesting kind of thing to do.
Yeah, that one's a fun one.
I mean, like seriously, 20 years, like you said, and then Dan went to Monica about her mimosa gummy drink. It's like just amazing how far we've come.
I was getting stoned to be a rebel when I was a kid, and now I'm like realized I was seeing ahead of time.
We're essentially about to become an artisanal chef. You know what I mean?
Who knows? Okay, so going back to your book is and here's the book. It will be out next January, correct?
Yes, it will.
Okay, and you have broken it down into basically 6 sections, right?
Correct.
You want to tell us about that, or do you want me to read?
Yeah, no. So we were, when we were thinking about how we wanted to organize the book and what organizing principle, we kind of thought about like what are the pillars of what cannabis does for you, and so what we have: mind, body, connection, creativity, productivity, and then last is joy. And like we said, the whole book is about joy. It's a running theme throughout, but we've broken it down into those sections so you can kind of really focus on like if you really want to amplify your productivity, turn to that section, and we'll give you activities and we talk about why cannabis amplifies, how it works on the brain to amplify productivity. And I think productivity for both of us probably is like one of the our favorite sections, just because it's it's the one that you least think of when you think of cannabis. Like, yeah, you want to be more productive, go and in smoke cannabis. Like, it just is counterintuitive.
A good sativa will do that.
But yeah, and so that's the way that we've organized it.
Yeah, it's just fun to talk to like an expert on everything, cannabis, psilocybin, and who's like Rick Doplin, actually, who's like a legend in the kind of like the future of psychoactive drugs for health and depression, anxiety, all that, and just fun. And he's like, Larry, like I just love a good PowerPoint when I'm high, and I'm just like, yeah,
Each his own.
No, that focus piece. There was a little controversy, which is that we have a Munchie Madness chart, and you can download a blank one and do your own, kind of like March Madness. And first of all, some of the feedback we got, which again is a little crushing when you work so hard in a book, and your son says, you can't put ice cream in two categories,
Yeah, we put ice cream.
That's what we did. That's what we did. And then it came down to fries versus ice cream. What's that?
Yeah.
In the final. And
That's
we
a
did
tough
that
one.
thing like the end of The Sopranos when you don't know the ending and it's so annoying. We were like, you decide. So we took some shortcuts. And so,
We're leaving here with these two.
Yeah, but we press on despite some of the criticism.
Well, I really also enjoyed the part that you talked about making bongs out of different things.
Oh yeah, that's
Because how resourceful are stoners when they want to get high? Somebody actually had to think about putting those two hot knives together to create, dabbing and all that. That there was these stoners were at a farm, nothing to do while their plants grew. And well, how can we get higher? So one of the things you had was a Snowball Bong, right?
Snowball, yeah.
Haven't been able to try that one in this area, but I'm sure anybody from the north probably could do that one pretty well. Now, and I've also seen bongs made out of like apples and cans of any kind. Even the gravity bongs done that. But the one that really blew me was Starburst fruit chews.
Yeah, Starburst pipe. Yeah, you can create a pipe out of Starburst. It's pretty messy because it requires the warmth of your hands to mold the Starburst. But you do get that lovely artificial flavor along with your cannabis.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
You could make your straw nana really straw nana.
What if Monica had Starburst gummies
Artisanal
and then the
Starburst.
pipe, then you smoke the pipe at the end?
We should collaborate.
That could be
Exactly. I can
Next.
smell a collaboration happening right now.
Merchandising.
Well, and the making your own delivery systems, it actually like there's such a true playfulness and joy. So like a couple years ago, I was with a buddy at like his family's like he had like a house on a lake, right? And like his like parents are there and like let's get high, right? And so like nobody had a pipe or a bong or anything, but he had some weed. So we just did the old school apple core thing, And I was like, here I am, an adult, and like we're hiding from his parents. Made a little apple core. It's just throwback.
Seems like old times.
I was like a kid again, But it's fun to be crafty. You can do a ton of. The cooking piece is its own version of crafty and productive. Cooking is like everything: joyful, productive, creative, connection. It's like the whole book, mind, body. But like just that playfulness that cannabis brings you. That your inhibitions are released a little bit. We have a whole thing called Be a Kid Again with a bunch of kid activities. And Melanie would love to talk to you about how she parents on cannabis.
I've had many friends tell me
Tee that
that
up
one
for me.
cannabis gummy is what makes mommy from a grouchy mommy to a happy mommy.
No, I am a big, absolute fan of parenting. And when I use the verb parenting, I don't mean like shuttling my kids in the minivan back and forth to, school. But it really does allow you to be really present and tuned into your children in the moment. And to like, they become they become even more interesting and delightful than they are, without cannabis. It's one of my personal like goals to make cannabis as kind of ubiquitous as like on the mommy circuit as rosé, because I just think it's incredibly unfortunate that I don't drink at all, and that there's stigma associated with still, even in the Bay Area, with cannabis versus alcohol. So
I read a stat, I think we have it in the book recently, but I reread it recently. And the way it goes is this. According to like a 2020, probably 21 Gallup poll, 68% of Americans have admitted doing cannabis. Admitted.
Right.
73% admitted drink less of Chardonnay. It's ridiculous. Like, we want a day that should come soon when it's not, Seth Rogen's the best, but it's not Seth Rogen getting high on a double joint. What's that called? The double joint?
cross.
But it's the cross joint, the cross double joint. It's in the book. But like John Hamm, instead of getting a bourbon, you know, he just gets high, and it's not a thing. It is. I mean, we can talk. We all know why it's. And by I drink. Melanie doesn't, but like has said. Are there any kids here?
Little children?
No.
Has said no one ever. That was great drunk sex. You know, but like that's just the high sex is awesome. Recommend it. Do try this at home. And we just know that it's better for you than alcohol. And I'm not against alcohol.
No, I was going to actually bring up the sex section because you have, was it Ashley, who wrote your,
Ashley
Ashley
Mantel.
Mantel.
yeah, I've known for a while, and she is definitely the goddess of sex and weed and all that. But you know, that you mentioned in there shotgunning weed with somebody, where you take the inhaling, you get close to somebody and blow it in there. You know, that can be pretty erotic.
Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, one of the key things that, I mean, cannabis is great at amplifying all pleasure, but probably the number one pleasure would be sex.
Right. And of course, you do have a recipe on how to make cannabis lube.
We do.
Which is actually the first thing. When I got involved in the cannabis community, a friend of mine was selling advertising space for cannabis, and she goes, "Oh, look, there's weed lube," and that's one of the things that brought me into this whole world that I'm in now. I'm like, weed lube?
Well, and just to be clear, like, it's super fun to make weed lube,
Yeah.
but it's not going to get you high, or it's
Not
gonna
in the
get
same
you
way.
It's going to do it has an effect on the area in which it's being used,
Well,
because it's not foul soluble.
right, because your skin won't absorb it.
Right.
But inside the female sex organ, it can be absorbed more. That's what I was
Yeah,
told. Like,
yeah.
and then also through the male, through their rear end, up that way.
Yeah, I'll have to look into that.
Yeah, from what I
I'll put a
understand,
pin in that.
because there was a company called Foria that created the weed suppositories and weed lube, and
Yeah.
that's one of the things they always said, that the female can feel actually more pleasure from infused lube than the gentleman can, unless the gentleman's, you know.
Monica,
way.
any comments on the?
Any comments on the weed
lube?
lube, Monica?
Yep.
It just shows you the giant world of cannabis that's now open to us. We were even saying earlier that you could even put weed on whatever job it is you have now, and you could be like a pioneer in the industry. We're still going that way. Another thing I read about in the book, you also talked about the Dark Dream Journal.
The Dink Dream Journal.
Is that
yeah.
it? I wrote Dark Dream. That's just
Yeah.
my brain.
Yeah, it's okay. I mean, we tried to cover all kinds of bases, and like, you know, lots of people are really into journaling, and so that's one of the things that, you know, we recommend.
What did you find out about yourself?
About journaling, that I tend to, I mean, because I think I write, you know, professionally, writing while high for pleasure isn't top of the list of things that I'm interested in doing, but a lot of people love journaling high.
You cannot beat a good high brainstorm session. Yes, 80% of your ideas are terrible, but they're terrible anyway for all of us. But you will come up with some stupid shit that turns out is kind of brilliant because you're uninhibited, blame it on the drugs, whatever you want. But like, no, and I love just jotting down things. I have terrible handwriting, so I'm like, what was this later, even whether I'm, you know, high or
And
not.
it was so funny the night before.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we have a game called High Shark Tank in there, which is
Saw that.
like you're at a party and you're sick of the werewolf game or celebrities. You're like, okay, High Shark Tank, and you get into teams and everyone comes up with a high idea, and then you rank them, and then if one of them, in fact, and I'm kind of cutting through the rules because you don't need to hear the rules, but if one of those ideas, in fact, becomes a company, what do you get?
Either 0.5% of the company,
Yeah.
or
Or $100, whichever one is more.
$100 at your local dispensary.
Yeah, and it may be $100, not 0.5% of the company, but you never know.
It's funny, my roommate and I used to call it Dink Tank sessions.
That's good.
We should, High Shark Tank. Dank Tank is better. We'll hit that for the revision. Yeah.
Tank, that's good. And also, you had another game to play with music.
Oh, the music thing is great. Go ahead.
Well, we have a couple music ones in there, but which one particularly?
I was thinking the one where you had they wrote down the different like themes that the music would be based on, and somebody puts one out there and somebody plays a song and then somebody plays a song from that one. Is that right?
Yeah, like, well, we would give you themes like teenagehood, and then everyone picks a song from that reminds them of that particular period in their life. Somebody creates a Spotify playlist, plays it, and then you have to guess was connected to that individual song. So yeah, we have lots of fun party games.
Then the music, one of our essays is by I mean, did anyone ever feel like, why does music sound better high? Like, do you ever wonder that? Why does food taste better? And because the way cannabis interacts with your brain, I don't know if the right word is tricking, but it slows things down, right? And what do we want to be? What all we ever hear all the time? In the moment. And it's all we hear, in the moment. And yes, everybody's right about that, be in the moment. And in fact, cannabis, whether it's nature or sex or music, really, or food, puts you in the moment, or parenting. And we have this really cool essay by Rob Ayers, who is in the band The Throwing Muses. And he, right? Shout out to The Throwing Muses.
Totally.
And he talks about just breaking down a song while high. And it's just like, we don't know how to do that. So it's just a level of like next level stuff about like, oh, now I know it's not all in my head, but it is in your head, right? Why music sounds even better.
Totally. And I mean, how many concerts did I go to? And as soon as the lights go down, the joint's lit.
Yeah.
Type thing. I mean, that's the way I grew up.
It's so great to go to a concert high. You know, I feel like we can just kind of like
It's kind of hard to make it there.
We can
and find your
advocate for
seat,
drugs
but-
in this room, but like, you know, it's not for everybody. But like, it is just great, and it's great. You know what's great? Not to sneak around with a one hit at like the Angelica Theater in New York City in like 1997, and like, I hope we don't get caught before we go see like, you know, like Lord of the Rings, you know, or like sneaking around. You can just do it. Maybe you can't get high in an indoor space, but like pop an edible. Just that all that dumbness, just to enjoy yourself, is out of the way. Certainly in California, is wonderful.
Okay, so we're getting to the point where we're getting towards the end of our hour, so to speak. So quickly, we're going to open up for questions. Anybody have while you think about one? And also, let's just go with okay, first one here in the front row. Let me get you. There we go. We'll get you a microphone. Okay, is that on? It's hard to talk through a basement.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you for the joyful conversation. This was a lot of fun. Melanie, I was wondering if you ever tried writing one of your serious literary fictions or maybe a draft of it while high, and how was the experience?
Yeah.
And my second question might be really dumb because I'm such an amateur in this, but is there a way to get THC and not fall asleep? Because that is my problem.
Yeah,
right
yeah.
away.
Writing wise, I have tried a little bit, and I was actually pleasantly surprised that it went okay. I don't think I had a whole lot of understanding of how it was going in the moment, which I'm pretty like to know what I'm doing. I'm a sentence by sentence writer, so people like to spit it all out. So I didn't love writing fiction high, but it wasn't too bad. But the answering, this is one of my favorite things to do. I want to have like, you know, Peanuts, the Lucy sign that says 5 cents advice. I want that, but I want 5 cents advice, cannabis advice. So, you know, one of the things that was surprising to us to learn was that there really is a distinction between sativas and indicas anymore. They've been so inbred that there is, you know, you don't know what you're getting. But if you are really, it is possible to get a pure sativa and a pure indica. So there is a chance that what you're smoking or ingesting is an indica, which will bring you down. So the piece of advice I would say is, one, try and just get a sativa, even though with the knowledge that it's hard to necessarily know. And two is going to a really great dispensary and telling them, I want something that's going to make you feel up and, you know, awake and have fun. Because a lot of times those bud tenders are excellent at their jobs. They really have to go through training to know what they're talking about. So going to a really good dispensary like Harborside or some of the other ones.
High fidelity of, you know, half a mile from here is a great one.
And asking and telling them what you want and what you don't want.
You can literally be like, I'm allergic to chocolate. I don't want gummies because I'm afraid my kid will eat it. And I have $30 in 5 minutes. And they'll be like, gotcha. And out you go. You know, they're great.
Okay, second row.
So, question about what do you do with someone that is clearly overdosed, and what do you do about the smell, which isn't so great? Is it how do you mask that? So yeah, those are the two questions.
So one of the facts we have in the book is that, I mean, obviously you can smoke too much so that you're uncomfortable, or ingest too much so you're very uncomfortable. But there's been 0 cases of anyone ever ODing from weed, which is a lovely statistic.
Yes.
I think that's right.
No, it's
No,
true.
it's right.
It's true.
Die.
saying like they take too much of dose than they should have. Like,
it's
that happens.
horrible. Absolutely, and I have been that person. So
Yes.
yes. So and I mean, in like my experience is that you just kind of have to write it out, but there are things that you can do, and one of them is consume something that is high in CBD.
Right.
CBD counteracts the THC, which is that you're not. The reason why people feel horrible when they smoke too much or ingest too much is the THC. So there are other components of weed that can counteract that.
And then also water, because they could be becoming dehydrated, because water will, I mean, cannabis takes water out of your system. And also fresh air and CBD and some food. Eat some food, the blood will go to your stomach instead of what it's doing with the weed.
And the last thing I was going to add is just having someone there to hold your hand.
Like anything, just stay with them and be like, you know what?
Yeah.
It's going to wear off. But
Yeah,
it's,
and it
it's,
will.
It's a tricky. It does happen,
And it's no fun to get super high like that. You freak out a little bit. You have to like keep thinking to yourself, I'll get better, I'll get better. Okay, and the next question?
Thanks for the great discussion so far. My question was about, you talked about the entourage effect. I was just wondering how I can know which strains have a good entourage, especially in pre-made edibles that I buy at a dispensary.
So the question was,
how do you
talking about the entourage effects in edibles that are pre-made in the dispensaries?
Yeah.
Gotcha. So I would look for edibles that have full spectrum listed somewhere, especially if it's like flower or pressed rosin that will contain a lot of the cannabinoids that are in the flower, also the terpenes that you're also going to want for that whole entourage effect, that full spectrum effect, right? A lot of the edibles that are in the dispensaries currently are made with distillates or concentrates, which has all those lovely terpene profiles, and a lot of the other cannabinoids too just stripped out of it to just have THC or just have CBD, which is not going to give you that full spectrum effect, entourage effect. So I would look for, edibles. Rose Los Angeles is a really great one. They do full spectrum edibles. I really love their gummies. They're delicious. And I'm not sure if there are other ones I can think of off the top of my head. I think Hotly, they have an olive oil that is full spectrum as well. There more will come to me, but definitely just look for full spectrum, anything that is using flower and not just like distillate and concentrate.
Yeah, and again, back to the budtenders, they really are good at this, and this is a big talking point for them currently, this idea of full spectrum.
Terpenes are big right now.
Well, yeah, or sometimes they'll have full spectrum or they'll have whole flower. So gummies that are made from the whole flower rather than just extracting THC.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, there is actually a
So you're not going to find this like in an edible. This is a whole terpene chart, which is exciting. So it tells you
the suspected and sometimes proven medical benefits.
Yeah.
Right.
So like when you smell flower and you smell the piney scent or the lemony scent, it's because it comes from a specific terpene that is also associated sometimes with like a lemon plant or a pine tree, and those have different effects too. But those won't be in your edibles; that'll be in your flower.
And also, what you want to do is when you have a weed that you like, make note of it. And then you can go up on leafly.com or one of the other websites and look, and it will list the different terpenes that are in that one. And you want to start looking for the ones to connect, like, oh, I think for me, it's what, that linalool is one of them?
Yeah,
I'm every day a linalool girl, because that was one that I always liked, kind of the fruity side and all that. So, okay, so any other questions?
I just want Melanie to see the Oh, my shirt. Actually, you should see his
Stoner we're all wearing some form of stoner fashion.
Also, you can just go on Etsy, a really cool stoner shirt. And for Melanie's birthday, I bought her a new pipe, and the pipe that I bought for Etsy had 2,200 reviews.
It's an amazing pipe.
Okay, do we have any more questions? Okay.
All right, does your book address anything about pain relief specifically?
It does definitely, but
So we talk about in the body section and some statistics about how many people use it for pain relief, and there's been not a ton of studies, right? So I think a lot are happening now. But and when we're talking about like science in the body and medicine, anecdotal is tricky. But I can tell you it helps me for pain relief. And
yeah, and I was just going to add on to that is that, and this is difficult too because we just talked about how there's no such thing as a sativa and an indica anymore, and everything is hybrid. But if you sativas also sometimes can amplify pain. So if you're really looking for pain relief, an indica is the way to go.
And also the truth is, cannabis isn't cheap. Although like small doses are often a good price, Like it's a little bit of trial and error, like I said about sleep. It definitely tried and failed a lot. To trying to find the right thing for my body and the way I wanted to feel and my DNA, and I found it, and that could change. But so, obviously, like be a little patient, and if that's what you're using it for, like, we hope it helps.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, well, we're getting near the end quickly before we are out of our hour. What's coming up now? So the Joy of Cannabis is coming out next January. Now, are you working on any other cannabis projects at the moment?
Well, I'll say it's
What's in the future?
So it's not available at Eastwind, but it's available for pre-order at bookshop.org. Or Amazon.
Yeah.
Sure. And what are you working on, Melanie?
It's I don't know. There may be a workbook in the works. We'll see what happens with that. Yeah, Monica.
Monica, what about you? What's coming up next?
So the book is coming out in August, and you can head over to my website, suweed.com, and you can see all the different places where you can pre-order the book. And then just in my book, I also mentioned that I will be donating a portion of my cookbook royalties to the Last Prisoner Project,
Which is a fantastic.
Is just really greatly appreciated. Yeah, no, totally. It's just, we should be supporting drug policy reform. I would be remiss to not say this. There's just so many people who are still incarcerated for nonviolent cannabis offenses, and while others are generating just so much wealth. So it's
Very worthy cause.
And yeah, like let's support it.
And
yeah,
so,
talk about that in there
yes,
too as well.
yes.
Just like frequenting dispensaries that are owned by people of color.
And lots of cannabis companies donate, if you look on the back of their packaging, to the Last Cannabis Project. So how can people, if they want to follow what you're doing, Ness, what's the easiest way to follow you guys?
Probably Instagram, The Joy of Cannabis. Or we have a lovely website where you can get on our soon-to-be released Substack.
Joyofcannabis.org. We'll do a Substack, the Substack newsletter thing with asking for reader activities and the next book, including some of the credit or whatever, free books in there. What you love to do. Hi, we want the Substack to be a conversation.
Okay. Really. And Monica, what's the best way to follow what you're doing?
You can follow me on Instagram, SueWeed, and you can go to my blog, sueweed.com.
Great. And I'm Dan Karkoska. You can follow me at DJDankSF on Instagram, and also read my puff column at 48hills.org. So we appreciate you guys coming out here for an hour and spending this time with us. We could probably sit here and talk about weed for hours and hours and hours, but now it's time to go get stoned because we've done our work. So again, thank you everybody for coming out, and yeah, go weed. Thank you very much. And Monica, thank you very much for Zooming in with us.